Welcome back, guys. In this lesson, we'll be doing a quick overview of the concept of security relative to your REST API. Now, when we talk about security, even though it is kind of self-explanatory when we talk about what security is, we kind of have to get into some specifics when discussing how we make an API secure. Now, some of these things are actually already taken into consideration and come out of the box with at least .NET Core API. I can't really vouch for other API development frameworks, but I can vouch for .NET API, where they do kind of enforce or strongly encourage certain security considerations from the get-go, from project creation, and then it's up to you if you want to continue with that. Really and truly, they make it so built in that you don't even realize how secure it might be out of the box. So the first and probably most important one would be to use SSL. So SSL is a standard, well, SSL, TLS, there are standards for HTTP communication, and what they do is enforce some amount of encryption across all communications going, let's say, across the pipe, right? So when you were creating the project, I believe there was an option there to enable or disable SSL. And well, I didn't bring it much attention to it, but if you want to see if SSL is enabled, you can always right click, go to properties, right click your project, go to properties, go down to debug, and then you would see here that enable SSL is there by default. So even in debug mode, they're encouraging you to use SSL. And of course, when you go ahead and publish, you're encouraged to use a proper SSL certificate. Otherwise, you also have access to a very powerful user authentication system in the form of Identity Core, which we will be setting up, which allows you to authorize, authenticate, and let's say sanitize requests based on who you think should be accessing your API. Now, you don't always need that for an API. Sometimes your API needs to be publicly accessible by any and everyone. And then there are sometimes when somebody needs to sign up, verify who they are before they can access information. Based on our API right now, anybody could come and access the list of hotels or a particular hotel at will. There is no restriction to authenticate and authorize a user before we allow them to do that. However, we will be putting things in place that would allow us to kind of control who gets access to what. Other things like what we expose in our URLs. And when we say URLs, I mean like here remember that when we wanted to get a particular hotel, we had to allow the user to pass that ID. That's not sensitive data. However, if it was something like a password or something that, you don't want the world to see, then you definitely don't want to put it in the parameters. So the way you design, you have a defensive way to design your API that such that you are implicitly securing certain things. So with poor design, you could introduce security flaws. So of course, what you allow to be passed over as plain text or as parameters, what you hash or you encrypt along the way, all of those things aid in making your application secure. Now, with all that said, sometimes we think that we need to have a very, very secure thing, and we try to put every form of security into our API. And that's not necessarily true. As I've always said, context determines a lot. So I'll give you an example. One time I had to develop an API wrapper around a third-party service. And the concept was that this third-party service provided some messaging services that my company would have used for various applications. Now, what we didn't want to do was integrate the third-party endpoint into 5-6 different applications, because if the vendor changed their design or something, then we would have 5 or 6 different touch points that we would have to maintain. Instead, I was put in charge of developing an API that would consume the third-party API, and then the internal applications would consume my API, so that if the third party changed their design, we would only have the one point to change because everybody's consuming our already internal API. Now, when when the company mentioned that, of course, security was very high on the list, and I went ahead and implemented all sorts of authentication and tokens, and we'll be looking at tokens also as we go along, but all sorts of security protocols. And really and truly was overkill because the internal API was just that. It was internal. We had IP whitelisting and very strong network protection protocols surrounding what was operating internally on our network. So to have an internal application need to verify who it is in order to access another internal API before it goes out to the third party, all of that was really overkill. So I'm just giving you a scenario of where I personally I would have implemented something that was overkill. After a while, we just ripped out all of the excess stuff, and we had other security protocols to kind of balance it out. So once again, context determines a lot. However, for this section, we will be implementing authentication, meaning our clients will need to register with our application, with our API application, and they would have to log in, passing in the username and password that they would have used to register. And then subsequent to that, we will be issuing them what we call JSON web tokens or bearer tokens, which will have information that will inform us each time they make a request of who they are. So they don't have to keep on logging in before they can do things. They do that one time, get this token, and pass that token along each time for us to verify and accept or deny. So that is what we'll be doing in this section. Enough of my monologue. Next up, we're going to be creating our identity core or integrating identity core into our project.